Have you ever wondered why humans feel so fragile? Why, despite all our technology and civilization and supposed mastery of the planet, there's this nagging sense that we're one bad century away from extinction? That feeling isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition, because there's something written in the fossil record that should humble every human alive today. There was a species that survived on this planet for nearly 2 million years. 2 million years. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. They weathered ice ages and droughts, volcanic winters and climate shifts that would make our current changes look mild. They spread across 2 continents, adapted to forests and savannas and coastlines, raised generation after generation after generation for a span of time so vast that our entire modern civilization, everything from the first cities to smartphones, would fit into just the last 0.5% of their existence. And here's what makes it so fascinating, maybe even a little unsettling. That species wasn't us. It was our ancestor, our evolutionary cousin, a human that came before, Homo erectus. And we, modern humans, Homo sapiens, we've only been here for about 300,000 years.
Yeah.
We haven't even made it to 1/6 of their run yet. Now, you might think this is just an interesting footnote in human evolution, another bit of paleontological trivia to file away. But here's the thing. Understanding why Homo erectus lasted so long, and why we might not, it tells us something profound about what it actually takes to survive. Not just as individuals, not even as societies, but as a species. And it raises an uncomfortable question that might follow you as you drift off to sleep tonight. What did they know that we've forgotten? If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. So maybe subscribe and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Perth at sunrise, someone in Chicago at midnight, someone in Amsterdam in the quiet hours before dawn. All of us, members of a species that has barely begun its tenure on Earth, wondering about the ones who came before, the ones who understood endurance in ways we're only beginning to grasp. So get comfortable, let your breathing slow. Over the next 2.5 hours, we're going to walk alongside Homo erectus through the deep corridors of time. We're going to explore what made them so successful, what their long survival might tell us about our own fragility, and whether the very things that make us clever might also make us vulnerable. We're going to trace the story of endurance itself, written not in history books, but in layers of ancient stone. And maybe, just maybe, we'll understand why surviving for 2 million years requires something we modern humans have traded away. Picture this. It's 1.9 million years ago, East Africa. The landscape is nothing like the safari parks you see in documentaries. This is rougher, wilder, more dangerous. The climate is shifting between extremes, wet periods that flood the plains alternating with droughts that crack the earth open. And in this harsh, unforgiving world, something new is walking upright. They stand about 5.5 feet tall, these early members of Homo erectus. Shorter than most modern humans, but proportioned almost exactly like you. Long legs for walking, arms that hang naturally at their sides instead of reaching for branches, a body built for endurance, for covering distance, for persistence. If you saw their skeleton without the skull, you might think it came from a modern human. But look at the head, and you'd know this was something different. The skull is lower, more elongated. Heavy brow ridges shade the eyes. The brain case is smaller than yours, about 2/3 the volume, but it's larger than any hominin that came before. Large enough for something new to be happening inside. Large enough for a kind of thinking that would carry this species across the next 2 million years. And here's what's remarkable about this moment. Homo erectus isn't just standing there, surviving in one place like their ancestors did. They're moving. They're walking. They're covering distances that would have seemed impossible to the earlier hominins who stayed close to food sources and familiar territories. They're learning something that will define their entire existence. They're learning how to endure. But to understand what that actually meant, to grasp the scale of what Homo erectus accomplished, we need to talk about time in a way that human brains aren't really built to comprehend. Because 2 million years isn't just a number, It's a story written in geological layers, in fossil deposits scattered across 2 continents, in the slow accumulation of small changes that add up to something vast. Let's put it in perspective. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, we appeared somewhere around 300,000 years ago. That's our entire species lifespan. Everything we are, everything we've ever done, every person who has ever lived and died and left descendants, all of it fits within that 300,000-year window. Now, the oldest known civilization is about 6,000 years old. The pyramids of Egypt are about 4,500 years old. The Roman Empire fell 1,500 years ago. World War II ended 80 years ago. And you, lying here right now, you've been alive for maybe a few decades at most. All of recorded human history, from the first cities to this moment, spans about 10,000 years. That's 1/30th of our species' existence. It's 1/200th of Homo erectus's run. If you imagine Homo erectus's entire lifespan as a 24-hour day, modern humans don't show up until 3:36 in the afternoon. And all of recorded history, everything you learned in school about ancient Rome and medieval Europe and the Renaissance, and the Industrial Revolution and 2 world wars and the atomic age and the space race and the internet, all of it happens in the last 7 minutes before midnight. We are so new, so recent. And yet we walk around acting like we've mastered the planet, like our way of life is permanent, like our 300,000 years means we have figured something out. But Homo erectus knew something we're only beginning to learn. They knew that survival isn't about cleverness or technology or dominance. It's about endurance. It's about lasting. It's about being there tomorrow and the next day and the next millennium and the next 100,000 years. And they were very, very good at it. Let's follow them. Let's walk alongside these ancient cousins as they spread across Africa and beyond, as they weather changes that would collapse our modern world, as they persist and adapt and endure through a time span that makes our entire species' history look like a brief experiment. Because here's the thing, they didn't just survive for 2 million years in one place, doing one thing unchanged. They evolved, they adapted, they spread across environments that should have killed them. They developed new tools, new strategies, new ways of being human. And they did it all without writing, without cities, without any of the things we think are necessary for long-term survival. They did it with something else, something we might have lost. The first thing you need to understand about Homo erectus is that they were walkers. Not in the casual sense of taking a stroll through the park. Walkers in the deep fundamental sense of a species whose entire survival strategy was built around the ability to cover vast distances efficiently, persistently, relentlessly. Their bodies tell this story. Every bone, every proportion, every adaptation speaks to endurance locomotion. Their legs are long relative to their torso, maximizing stride length while minimizing energy cost. Their feet have developed the modern human arch, that spring-loaded structure that stores and releases energy with each step. Their gluteus maximus, the largest muscle in the human body, has expanded to stabilize the pelvis during upright walking. Even their inner ear has changed, developing a better sense of balance for bipedal movement. These aren't small changes, these are wholesale redesigns of the primate body plan, transforming a creature built for climbing and short-distance movement into a walking machine. And that transformation would define everything about how Homo erectus lived and where they could go and how long they could last. Because walking, real endurance walking, it opens up possibilities that stay-in-one-place hominins could never access. You can follow herds across seasonal migrations, you can escape local droughts by travelling to regions where water still flows, you can spread your genetic lineage across continents instead of staying confined to a single valley or forest patch. You can, quite literally, walk your way into 2 million years of existence. But there's a cost. There's always a cost. These. Walking far requires energy. It requires planning. It requires knowing where you're going and why and when to turn back and when to push forward. It requires a kind of thinking that the earlier hominins didn't need. And this is where Homo erectus begins to show signs of something new. Something that looks, if you squint at the fossil record just right, like the beginning of the kind of mind that would eventually produce us. Their brains were growing. Not quickly, not in a sudden evolutionary leap, but steadily, incrementally over hundreds of thousands of years. Early Homo erectus had brains around 900 cubic centimeters. Later populations pushed past 1,100, still smaller than the modern human average of 1,400, but the trajectory was clear. More neurons, more processing power, more capacity for the kind of complex thought that long-distance movement requires. And they were using those brains in ways we can still detect in the archaeological record. They were making tools, not simple tools like the earlier stone choppers that hominins had been producing for 1,000,000 years before them. Sophisticated tools. Tools that required planning and skill and an understanding of how stone fractures and how edges cut and how different types of rock produce different types of implements. The hand axe. That's the signature tool of Homo erectus, and it appears in the fossil record about 1.7 million years ago. Shaped like a teardrop, sharp on both edges, perfectly balanced in the hand. It could butcher meat, scrape hides, dig for roots, cut wood. It was the Swiss Army knife of the Pleistocene, and making one required understanding symmetry, proportion, the properties of different stone types, the sequence of strikes needed to achieve the desired shape. These weren't random rocks they picked up and used once. These were crafted objects, often carried for long distances, carefully maintained, passed down through generations. We find the same hand axe designs across Africa and into Asia and Europe, a technological tradition that remained remarkably stable for over 1,000,000 years. And here's where it gets interesting. That stability, that conservatism in tool design, it's sometimes pointed to as evidence that Homo erectus wasn't very innovative, that they made the same tools for 1,000,000 years because they couldn't think of anything better. But there's another way to interpret it. Maybe they made the same tools for 1,000,000 years because those tools worked. Because in a world where survival is already challenging, where every generation has to figure out how to make it through droughts and predators and the constant search for food, sticking with what works is the smart strategy. Innovation is risky. Innovation means trying something new that might fail at the exact moment you need it to succeed. And Homo erectus, more than any other hominin, understood risk management. They understood that survival over the long term requires caution, conservatism, not putting all your eggs in the basket of clever new ideas that might or might not pay off. This is the first hint of something we'll keep seeing throughout their 2,000,000-year story. They weren't the flashiest species, they weren't the most innovative or the quickest to adapt, but they were steady, they were reliable, they were there, generation after generation, doing what worked, making small adjustments when necessary, but never abandoning the core strategies that kept them alive. It's a different kind of intelligence than the one we modern humans pride ourselves on. Not the intelligence of rapid innovation and constant change and creative destruction. The intelligence of endurance, of knowing when to change and when to stay the course. Of understanding that surviving 2,000,000 years isn't about being the smartest or the fastest. It's about being good enough consistently, across time frames so vast that entire climates come and go. But they weren't just staying in one place doing the same thing. That's the second remarkable aspect of Homo erectus. While they were being conservative with their technology, they were being incredibly bold with their geography. Imagine you're a member of an early Homo erectus group somewhere in East Africa about 1.8 million years ago. Your world is the savanna you've known your entire life, maybe a territory of a few hundred square kilometers. Beyond that, unknown lands, unfamiliar water sources, different plants, different predators, everything your survival instincts tell you to avoid. But something pushes you outward. Maybe it's population pressure as your group grows too large for the local resources. Maybe it's drought, forcing you to search for water in new directions. Maybe it's just the ancient human restlessness that pull toward the horizon that shows up in our species too. Whatever the reason, you start walking. And you don't stop. Your children walk. Their children walk. Generations pass and this walking continues, spreading outward from Africa in multiple waves, following coastlines and river valleys, adapting to new environments as they go. By 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus has reached what is now the country of Georgia in the Caucasus. We know this because we found their remains at a site called Dmanisi. 5 individuals preserved along with their stone tools dated to right around that time. They've walked out of Africa, crossed into Asia, established themselves in entirely new climates and ecosystems. By 1.6 million years ago, they were in Java, on the islands of Southeast Asia. By 1.5 million years ago, they're in China. By 1.4 million years ago, they've reached as far as modern-day Spain, an arc of human presence stretching from southern Africa to Western Europe to the Indonesian archipelago, all on foot, all without maps or written knowledge or any way to preserve information except through direct demonstration and observation. Think about what that required. Not just physically, though the physical demands were enormous, but cognitively, socially, emotionally. Every new environment presented novel challenges. Different plants to identify as food or poison, different predators with different hunting strategies, different climates requiring different shelters, different stone types for tool making, different everything. And Homo erectus figured it out. Not always perfectly, not always on the first try. The fossil record shows populations that didn't make it, groups that ventured into environments too harsh and left no descendants. But enough of them survived, enough of them adapted, that the species as a whole spread across 2 continents and persisted everywhere they established themselves. This is endurance thinking at a geographic scale, not the quick expansion and exploitation we see in modern humans, moving into new territories with advanced tools and then sometimes exhausting resources, and moving on. Slow, steady expansion. Get there, adapt, establish, persist. Move when necessary, but never faster than you can learn the new environment. Conserve energy, minimize risk, last. And here's what's remarkable. As they spread across these vast distances, encountering different environments and challenges, they remained recognizably the same species. Oh, there was variation certainly. Populations in different regions developed slight differences in skull shape, body proportions, tool preferences, but the core anatomy stayed consistent. The basic toolkit stayed consistent. They were all still Homo erectus, all still following the same general survival strategies that had worked in Africa. This is the opposite of rapid speciation. This is a species that found a way of being that worked across an enormous range of environments, and they stuck with it. For nearly 2 million years, they stuck with it. Now you might be wondering as you lie there in the dark, why does this matter? Why spend time thinking about an extinct species that disappeared hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans built the first city? It matters because Homo erectus shows us what long-term survival actually looks like. And it's nothing like what we're doing now. We modern humans, we've taken the opposite approach to almost everything Homo erectus did. Where they were conservative, we're innovative. Where they were cautious, we're bold. Where they spread slowly and adapted carefully, we've exploded across the planet in a fraction of the time, reshaping environments to suit us rather than adapting to them. Where they maintained stable technologies for hundreds of thousands of years, we obsolete our tools every few decades or even years, and we pride ourselves on this. We think our way is better, more advanced, more successful. We point to our cities and our technology and our population numbers as evidence that we've figured out something Homo erectus never could. But we've been here for 300,000 years. They lasted 2 million. We're not even close to their record. We haven't proven anything yet except that we can spread quickly and change rapidly and create complex systems. What we haven't proven is that we can endure. And there are reasons to worry that we can't. That the very traits that make us successful in the short term, our innovation and boldness and ability to reshape environments, might be exactly the traits that prevent us from lasting the way Homo erectus did. But we'll come back to that. For now, let's stay with them. Let's walk through their world a bit longer, understanding not just what they did, but how they thought, how they lived, what it actually felt like to be a member of a species that would outlast anything that came before or since. Let's talk about fire, because fire changes everything. And Homo erectus may have been the first hominin to truly master it. The evidence is complicated, spread thin across the vast time span of their existence. We find what might be hearths at sites dating to 1.5 million years ago. Burned bone, heated soil, concentrations of ash that suggest controlled fire rather than natural wildfire. But the evidence is never quite definitive, and archaeologists argue about whether these early signs represent true fire control or just opportunistic use of natural fires. But by 800,000 years ago, the evidence becomes clearer. Multiple sites across Africa and Asia show clear signs of repeated fire use. Hearths built and rebuilt in the same locations, tool-making debris arranged around fire pits, burned remains of animals suggesting cooking. And by 400,000 years ago, it's undeniable. Homo erectus is using fire regularly, systematically, in ways that transform their existence. Fire means light in the darkness, pushing back the night hours when predators hunt. Fire means warmth in cold climates, allowing expansion into temperate regions that would otherwise be lethal. Fire means cooked food, breaking down tough plant fibers and making nutrients more accessible, allowing the gut to shrink and the brain to grow because digestion requires less energy. Fire means protection, keeping dangerous animals at bay. Fire means a gathering point, a centre for the social group to cluster around. Fire means everything changes. But fire also means something else, something more subtle, but perhaps more important for understanding how Homo erectus lasted so long. Fire means planning. Fire means thinking ahead, because fire doesn't maintain itself. It needs fuel gathered in advance. It needs tending, someone staying awake to keep it alive through the night. It needs protection from rain and wind. It needs knowledge of which woods burn well and which just smoke. It needs careful transport when the group moves, carried as embers wrapped in leaves or bark, nursed back to flame at the new camp. Fire requires a different kind of intelligence than just reacting to immediate challenges. It requires the ability to think about tomorrow, about tonight, about the cold that's coming, about the predators that will emerge at dusk. It requires cooperation, individuals taking turns maintaining the flames. It requires cultural knowledge, techniques passed from generation to generation, because if you lose the knowledge of how to make or maintain fire, people die. And Homo erectus, managing fire for potentially 1 million years or more, they had to develop all of this. The planning, the cooperation, the cultural transmission, the long-term thinking that fire demands. This is what steady endurance builds. Not flashy innovations that change everything overnight, but slow accumulation of knowledge and practice and social structures that make survival just a little bit more reliable, a little bit more predictable, a little bit more secure. They weren't trying to conquer nature. They weren't trying to bend the world to their will. They were trying to find a stable relationship with their environment, one they could maintain not just for their lifetime or their children's lifetime, but for thousands of lifetimes, stretching into a future so distant they couldn't possibly imagine it. And it worked. For 2 million years, it worked. But let's look more carefully at what that 2 million years actually contained, because it's easy to imagine it as a long, stable period of unchanging existence. Same climate, same challenges, same responses, but that's not what happened. That's not what those 2 million years were like at all. The planet changed around them, dramatically, repeatedly, in ways that would test every adaptation they'd developed. Ice ages came and went, not once, not twice, but dozens of times over their existence. Periods when glaciers covered much of Europe and Asia, when sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet as water locked up in ice, when savannas turned to deserts and forests retreated, and species went extinct by the thousands. And then the ice would retreat, and the whole pattern would reverse. Forests would expand, grasslands would flourish, new species would emerge or migrate into newly habitable zones. Homo erectus lived through all of it, through ice age after ice age after ice age, through climate swings that would make our current concerns about global warming look modest by comparison, through the kind of environmental chaos that ends species, that writes extinction events into the geological record. And they didn't just survive in one safe refuge, waiting for conditions to improve. They persisted across their entire range. When ice ages made Europe inhospitable, populations retreated but didn't disappear. When droughts hit East Africa, populations adapted or moved but kept going. When coastlines shifted with changing sea levels, they followed the resources and established new territories. This is resilience at a scale we modern humans have never experienced. We've had a remarkably stable climate for the last 10,000 years, the entire period of our civilization. We have never had to survive a real ice age, never had to watch glaciers advance across our homelands, never had to adapt to climate swings that last for tens of thousands of years. Homo erectus did that over and over and over again, and they came through it every time. How? What did they know? What strategies did they employ that allowed them to weather changes that would certainly collapse our modern civilization? We can only guess from the archaeological record, from the patterns we see in tool distribution and settlement locations and skeletal remains. But some things become clear. They were flexible but not fragile. They could adapt to new conditions without abandoning their core survival strategies. When environments changed, they changed with them, but slowly, carefully, maintaining the fundamental approaches that had worked for hundreds of thousands of years, while making incremental adjustments to new realities. They didn't rely on complex supply chains or specialized knowledge held by only a few individuals. Everyone in the group knew how to make tools, find food, build shelter, maintain fire. Redundancy was built into their social structure. If part of the group was lost, the survivors could rebuild because the essential knowledge was distributed, not centralized. They didn't push their environments to the breaking point. There's no evidence that Homo erectus ever caused local extinctions through overhunting or habitat destruction. They took what they needed and moved on, allowing resources to recover. They understood, whether consciously or through trial and error, that you can't survive long-term by exhausting the systems you depend on. And they didn't fragment into isolated populations that lost contact with each other. Somehow, across vast distances, genetic exchange continued. Ideas spread, technologies diffused. They remained connected enough that the species stayed coherent even while spread across two continents. These aren't small achievements. These are sophisticated survival strategies that require a kind of wisdom we might have lost in our rush toward complexity and specialization and rapid change. And here's what makes it all the more remarkable. They did this without language, or at least without language as we know it. Their vocal anatomy was different from ours, their throat structure less capable of the fine control needed for the rapid, complex vocalizations of modern speech. They almost certainly communicated, probably quite effectively, using gesture and facial expression, and probably some vocal sounds. But full grammatical language, the kind that lets you explain abstract concepts or tell stories about things that happened long ago, or plan detailed future events that probably came later with species that came after them. They endured for 2 million years without the tool we think is most essential to human success. Without the ability to say, remember when the drought came and we moved north to the river valley? We should do that again. Without the ability to pass down detailed cultural knowledge through stories, without the ability to argue about the best course of action or explain complex ideas to the next generation. They just showed each other, watched, learned, repeated what worked, and that was enough. Maybe more than enough. Maybe the simplicity of their communication was actually an advantage, preventing the kind of cultural elaboration that can become rigid, that can lock you into the strategies that worked in the past but fail when conditions change. But we're speculating now. The truth is, we don't fully understand how Homo erectus thought or communicated or made decisions. We see the results, the 2 million years of survival, but the internal experience, the subjective reality of being Homo erectus, that's lost to us. What we do know is this: they were there. For an almost incomprehensible span of time, they were there, walking the same East African valleys where humans first evolved, spreading across Asia, establishing themselves in Europe, weathering changes that would end us, persisting when everything suggested they should fail. And then, eventually, they didn't. Somewhere between 200,000 and 100,000 years ago, depending on which populations you look at, Homo erectus disappears from the fossil record. The longest-running human species, the most successful hominin in evolutionary history, goes extinct. Why? What happened? What finally ended the run that had lasted through ice ages and droughts and volcanic winters and climate chaos? We don't know for certain. The fossil record from that period is sparse, the evidence incomplete, but we can see some patterns, some suggestions of what might have happened. New species were emerging. Homo heidelbergensis, probably descended from Homo erectus populations in Africa or Europe, was developing larger brains and more sophisticated tools. Neanderthals were establishing themselves across Europe and Western Asia, perfectly adapted to Ice Age conditions. Denisovans, a mysterious population we know mostly from genetic evidence, were spreading across Asia, and somewhere in Africa, a new species was taking its first steps. A species with an unusually large brain and an unprecedented capacity for symbolic thought and rapid innovation. US Homo sapiens, the species that would eventually spread across the entire planet and reshape it in ways no other organism ever has. And wherever these new species appeared, Homo erectus started to disappear. Not immediately, not in a dramatic confrontation, but gradually, population by population, replaced or absorbed or simply outcompeted by hominins with bigger brains and fancier tools and more complex social structures. The last known Homo erectus populations were in Java, isolated on islands in Southeast Asia, holding on until maybe 100,000 years ago, maybe later. The evidence is unclear, but eventually they too were gone, 2 million years, and then nothing. The endurance specialists, the survivors who had outlasted everything evolution threw at them, ended not with catastrophe but with quiet extinction, replaced by species that were cleverer but, at least so far, nowhere near as persistent. And this brings us back to where we started, to you lying there in the dark, a member of Homo sapiens, the species that displaced Homo erectus and now dominates the planet, the species that has been here for 300,000 years compared to their 2 million, the species that have built cities and writing and technology and all the complexity we take for granted, the species that might not make it to 400,000 years. Because here's what Homo erectus teaches us. Here's the lesson written in 2 million years of fossil evidence. Long-term survival and rapid innovation might be inversely related. The traits that make you successful in the short term, the big brains and complex tools and ability to reshape environments, those same traits might make you fragile over the long term. Homo erectus was simple, relatively small-brained, conservative in their technology, cautious in their expansion, and they lasted 2 million years. We're complex, large-brained, innovative to the point of constant disruption, bold to the point of recklessness, and we're 300,000 years in with no guarantee we'll make it to 400,000. Maybe endurance requires simplicity. Maybe lasting requires resisting the temptation to constantly innovate and expand and change. Maybe the species that survive longest are the ones that find a stable relationship with their environment and stick with it, even when cleverer strategies seem available. Or maybe we're overthinking it. Maybe Homo erectus just got unlucky, eventually displaced by competitors who happened to evolve at the right time in the right places. Maybe their extinction teaches us nothing about our own survival chances. Maybe we'll innovate our way to millions of years of persistence, finding solutions to every problem, adapting faster than any challenge can overwhelm us. We don't know. We can't know. The experiment is still running. We're still here, still figuring out whether our way of being human can last, or whether we're just a brief, bright explosion of complexity in the long, slow story of human evolution. But the fossil record is clear about one thing. If you want to last 2 million years, you need something Homo erectus had and we might be losing. The ability to be enough without needing to be more. The capacity to adapt without constant disruption. The wisdom to know when to change and when to persist. The patience to survive not just through one crisis or one generation or one millennium, but through geological time, through climate cycles, through the slow turning of evolutionary processes that operate on scales our minds can barely comprehend, Homo erectus understood endurance. Whether they knew it consciously or just embodied it in their conservative, persistent way of life, they understood that surviving for the long term requires different strategies than succeeding in the short term, and we're still learning that lesson. Still figuring out whether our complexity will save us or doom us. Still wondering whether 300,000 years is just the beginning of our story or already approaching the middle or even the end. The night deepens around you. Your body is settling, relaxing, preparing for sleep. And somewhere in that settling, maybe you can feel it. The weight of time, the vast stretch of years behind us and the unknown years ahead. The question of whether we, like Homo erectus, will find a way to endure, or whether we'll burn bright and brief, a flash of innovation that changes everything and then fades, replaced by whatever comes next. Homo erectus walked for 2 million years. We've barely begun our journey, and everything about our survival as a species remains an open question. But we'll explore that more. In the next part of our journey, we'll walk with them more closely, see how they actually lived day to day, understand the details of their endurance. For now, just rest. Let these thoughts drift. The ancient ones who came before, they're gone now, but their story remains, written in stone, waiting for us to read and understand and maybe, if we're wise, learn from. Sleep now. The 2 million years can wait until morning. To understand what 2 million years of survival actually required, we need to go back. Not to the beginning, not to the first Homo erectus populations emerging in Africa, but to somewhere in the middle, to a time when they'd already been walking the earth for 900,000 years. When their way of life had been tested and refined across hundreds of thousands of generations, when they'd become, if you'll forgive the phrase, professionally good at surviving. Picture yourself standing on what will one day be called the island of Java, about 1 million years ago. You're not on an island yet. Sea levels are lower during this ice age, and Java is connected to mainland Asia by a broad plain that floods during interglacial periods but is dry grassland now. This is important, because Homo erectus is here, and they got here by walking, following coastlines and river valleys, spreading slowly eastward over tens of thousands of years. The landscape around you is lush, tropical forest giving way to more open woodland. Rivers carve through the terrain, creating valleys and floodplains rich with life, and everywhere, if you know where to look, signs of human presence. Not villages or farms or permanent settlements, nothing that would last in the archaeological record except as scattered stones and occasional bones. But signs nonetheless. A pile of stones near a river crossing, the remnants of someone napping hand axes a few days or weeks ago. The scattered bones of a large animal, some showing cut marks where stone tools separated meat from bone. A well-worn path between a freshwater source and higher ground. Fire-cracked rocks around what might have been a hearth. Small things, ephemeral things. The light touch of a species that moves through the landscape without transforming it, taking what it needs and moving on. This is the endurance lifestyle. This is what surviving for 1 million years looks like on the ground in the daily details of existence. Let's walk through a day with them. Not a special day, not a dramatic hunt or a crisis or a celebration. Just an ordinary day in the life of a Homo erectus group, somewhere around 1 million years ago, in the middle of their long run. Dawn comes slowly to the tropical forest. The night sounds fade as diurnal animals begin to stir. And in a small clearing near a stream, a group of 15 or 20 Homo erectus individuals starts their day. They're not all from one family, not in the nuclear family sense you'd understand. This is a mixed group, multiple generations, loosely related through complex kinship networks that we can only guess at. There are a few infants clinging to their mothers' backs or sitting near the remnants of last night's fire. Several children ranging from toddlers to adolescents. A mix of adults, both male and female, and a couple of older individuals, greying, their teeth worn but still functional, still contributing. No one wakes with an alarm or to a schedule. Sleep has been fragmented throughout the night, individuals taking turns staying alert, keeping watch, maintaining the fire. By first light, most of the group is stirring, stretching, moving to the stream for water. Communication happens without much sound, gestures, glance, the kind of wordless coordination that comes from living together closely for your entire life. Someone rebuilds the fire, feeding it with dry wood gathered the previous evening. Someone else checks the tools, examining hand axes for damage, selecting which ones to carry today. The children cluster around the fire, warming themselves, waiting. There's no discussion of plans, no debate about what to do today. The routine is understood, practiced across thousands of similar mornings. Some will forage, spreading out into the forest to gather fruits, nuts, tubers, whatever plants are in season. Others will hunt or scavenge, looking for opportunities to acquire meat. A few will stay near camp, watching the youngest children, maintaining the fire, working on tools. This isn't random. This isn't chaos. This is a carefully balanced system that's been refined over hundreds of thousands of years. Everyone has a role. Everyone contributes. The success of the group depends on this coordination, this unspoken understanding of who does what and when. But here's what's interesting. The roles aren't rigid. They aren't assigned by some strict hierarchy or cultural rule. They're flexible, adaptive, responding to the needs of the moment and the capabilities of individuals. The older woman who would have been foraging yesterday stays in camp today because her knee is bothering her. The adolescent boy who usually helps with hunting joins the foraging group because they're heading toward an area with fig trees and he knows where they are. Everyone adjusts without discussion, without conflict, because the goal isn't individual achievement or status. The goal is the group surviving another day. This is collective endurance. Not heroic individual survival, not one clever person figuring out solutions for everyone else, but the steady, reliable cooperation of individuals who understand that their survival is linked, that what benefits the group benefits them, that the best strategy for living long enough to see grandchildren is making sure everyone else lives too. Let's follow the foraging group. 4 adults, 3 adolescents, spreading out into the forest but staying within earshot of each other. They're not searching randomly. They know this territory. They've walked these paths countless times. They know which trees fruit in which seasons, where water collects after rain, which areas shelter edible tubers, where the bee nests are likely to be. This is accumulated knowledge, passed down not through writing or formal instruction, but through observation and practice. The adults show the adolescents where to look and how to identify what's edible. The adolescents practice, make mistakes, learn from corrections. Knowledge accumulates across generations, each group adding its discoveries to what came before. But the knowledge stays practical, grounded in direct experience. They don't theorize about plant biology or develop abstract categories. They know this plant makes you sick and this one doesn't. This root is good when the rains come, but poisonous when the ground is dry. This fruit is ripe when it smells like this. Concrete, specific, tied to the senses and the seasons. And it's enough, more than enough. Across the 2 million years of Homo erectus existence, this kind of practical, experiential knowledge kept them fed in environments from tropical Africa to temperate Europe to the seasonal forests of Asia. They didn't need to understand why these patterns existed. They just needed to know the patterns. The foraging group returns to camp by midday with bags woven from plant fibers filled with fruits, nuts, and several large tubers. It's a good haul, not spectacular, not enough to store for future days, but enough for today and maybe tomorrow. They don't think about accumulating surplus. They don't plan for next week or next month. They respond to what's available now and trust that there will be similar opportunities tomorrow. This present-focused thinking, it's easy to dismiss as unsophisticated, but it's also deeply adapted to a lifestyle of movement and environmental variability. If you're going to be walking to a new camp in a few days, storing surplus food doesn't make sense. The energy cost of carrying it outweighs the benefit. Better to know where food will be, to be able to find it when you need it, than to try to control it or store it or manage it. Meanwhile, the hunting party has been tracking a small group of deer through the forest. Not stalking silently, not setting elaborate traps, just following, persistently, patiently, keeping the animals in sight, wearing them down through endurance rather than speed. This is persistence hunting, and Homo erectus is built for it. Their long legs and efficient stride allow them to maintain a steady pace for hours. Their hairless bodies and extensive sweat glands let them cool efficiently in the tropical heat, avoiding the overheating that would stop a prey animal. Their ability to carry water in containers made from animal bladders or plant materials means they don't have to stop at water sources as frequently as the animals they're following. So they walk, and walk, and walk, following the deer through the heat of the day, maintaining visual contact, never rushing, never giving up, and eventually, after hours of this relentless pursuit, the deer begin to stumble, their body temperature rising, their muscles fatiguing, their water depleting, and when one finally collapses, too exhausted to run further, the hunting party moves in. A quick strike with a stone-tipped spear. Not a perfect weapon, not always lethal on the first strike, but effective enough when the prey is already incapacitated. The deer struggles briefly and then stills. The hunters butcher it immediately, using hand axes to separate the meat from the carcass. They know from long experience which parts spoil quickly in the heat and which you can last through a day of carrying. They know how to crack open the bones to access the marrow, that rich source of fat and nutrients. They know to remove the hide carefully because it's valuable for other purposes. And then they carry it back to camp, not just the hunters. Everyone who can carry helps, because this meat belongs to the group, not to the individuals who killed the animal. This is the social contract of Homo erectus. The hunters share their kill, the foragers share their finds, the toolmakers share their hand axes. Everything flows through the group, distributed based on need more than individual contribution. This isn't altruism in the moral sense. It's enlightened self-interest over the long term. By sharing today, you ensure you'll be shared with tomorrow when you're sick or injured, or your hunting trip failed. By contributing to the group's well-being, you invest in your own future security. The individuals who hoard or cheat or refuse to share, they might gain in the short term, but they lose the group's support. And without the group, survival becomes much harder. This is collective insurance, distributed across individuals, sustained across generations. And it works because the group is small enough that everyone knows everyone else, that reputations matter, that behaviors have consequences that ripple through the social network. Back at camp, the meat is distributed, not equally precisely, but through a complex social calculus that we can only glimpse in the archaeological record. Pregnant women get extra, nursing mothers get extra, the hunters who made the kill get recognition, respect, maybe slightly larger portions, but not so much that others are left wanting. Children get enough, the elderly get enough, everyone eats, and then the fire is built up and the meat is cooked. This transforms everything. Cooking breaks down tough fibers, makes nutrients more accessible, kills parasites and bacteria that could cause illness. Homo erectus probably discovered these benefits through trial and error over hundreds of thousands of years, learning without understanding the underlying biology that cooked food is safer and more nutritious than raw. But fire does more than cook food. As the sun sets and darkness gathers around the camp, the fire becomes a center, a focal point. Everyone clusters near it, not just for warmth and light, but for the safety it represents. Predators stay away from fire. The unknown terrors of the night remain beyond the circle of light, and in that circle, around that fire, something happens that's harder to see in the fossil record, but might be more important than any tool or any piece of technology. Social bonding, connection, the strengthening of relationships that make the group work. They're not having complex conversations. Remember, they probably lack the vocal anatomy for the kind of rapid, nuanced speech that modern humans use. But they're communicating. Gestures, facial expressions, vocalization that's more like singing than speaking, conveying emotion and intention without grammar or syntax. Touch, grooming, sitting close. These are the tools of social cohesion for a species that survived 2 million years largely on the strength of their groups. And here's something we can infer from comparative studies of other primates and from what we know about human social psychology. These evening gatherings around the fire weren't just functional. They felt good. The warmth of the fire, the safety of the group, the satisfaction of a full belly after a successful day, the physical closeness to others. These aren't just survival strategies. These are experiences that generate positive emotions, that make individuals want to stay with the group, that reinforce the social bonds that keep everyone alive. Homo erectus might not have had language, but they had this: the evening fire, the shared meal, the comfort of companionship, and that was enough to sustain cooperation across 2 million years. As night deepens, individuals start to settle, not into elaborate shelters. The archaeological evidence suggests Homo erectus used simple windbreaks, maybe rough structures of branches and leaves, nothing permanent, nothing that would require much time to construct or leave obvious traces in the soil. Just enough to block wind and rain, to create a slightly more comfortable microclimate for sleep. They sleep lightly in shifts, some always alert. The fire is maintained through the night, someone feeding it periodically, ensuring the flames don't die and leave the group vulnerable. This is another form of cooperation, another way the group shares the burden of survival. No one has to stay awake all night. Everyone takes a turn. The cost is distributed, and in the morning the cycle begins again. Wake, gather, forage or hunt, return, share, cook, sleep. Day after day, week after week, season after season, generation after generation. This is what 2 million years of survival looks like up close. Not grand achievements or dramatic innovations, just the steady, reliable repetition of behaviours that work. The patient accumulation of knowledge about the local environment. The careful maintenance of social bonds that make cooperation possible. The conservative approach to technology that prioritises reliability over novelty. It's not exciting, it's not the stuff of epic stories or heroic tales, but it's durable, it's sustainable. It's the kind of lifestyle that can persist through ice ages and droughts and volcanic winters because it doesn't depend on complex supply chains or specialised knowledge or any single innovation. It's robust, redundant, resilient. Every person in the group knows the essential skills. If half the group were lost tomorrow, the survivors could rebuild because the knowledge is distributed, not centralised. If tools are lost, they can be remade because everyone knows how to knap stone. If a familiar territory becomes inhospitable, the group can move because their lifestyle is portable, flexible, not tied to any fixed location. This is what long-term survival requires. Not brilliance, not innovation, not dominance, sufficiency, reliability. The ability to be good enough consistently across time frames that make individual lifetimes irrelevant. But let's look more closely at some of the specific adaptations that made this possible. Because Homo erectus wasn't just behaviourally suited for long-term survival. Their bodies, their biology, their very anatomy was shaped by the demands of endurance. Start with heat management. This might seem like a small thing, but it's actually crucial for understanding how Homo erectus spread across tropical environments and engaged in persistence hunting during the heat of the day. They were nearly hairless. Not completely, but dramatically less hairy than earlier hominins or modern apes. This naked skin allowed for more efficient cooling through sweating, and they had more sweat glands densely packed across their bodies, capable of producing copious amounts of sweat to dissipate heat. Why does this matter? Because most mammals cool themselves through panting, which requires them to stop moving. An antelope being chased has to choose between running and cooling. It can't do both effectively, but Homo erectus could. They could walk through the hottest part of the day, maintaining their pursuit, cooling themselves through sweating while their prey overheated. This gave them an advantage that wasn't about being faster or stronger. It was about being able to persist when others had to stop, about outlasting rather than outrunning, about endurance over speed. And this strategy worked so well that it's still with us. Modern humans, despite all our innovations and technologies, we still have those sweat glands, that hairless skin. We inherited it from Homo erectus because it was such an effective adaptation for survival in tropical environments. But heat management was just one piece. Let's look at their teeth, because teeth tell stories about diet, and diet tells stories about adaptation and survival strategies. Homo erectus had smaller teeth than earlier hominins, smaller molars, less robust jaws. This suggests a diet that was easier to chew, less dependent on the tough fibrous plant materials. And the most likely explanation for this shift is cooking. Cooked food is softer, it requires less chewing. Over hundreds of thousands of years, populations that cooked their food regularly could get by with a smaller, less energy-expensive dental equipment. The energy saved in maintaining smaller teeth and lighter jaws could be invested elsewhere, like in the brain. Because here's the interesting correlation. As Homo erectus teeth got smaller, their brains got bigger. Not in a sudden leap, but gradually, incrementally, over the course of their 2 million-year existence. Early populations had brains around 900 cubic centimeters. Later populations approached 1,100. Still smaller than modern humans, but the trend was clear. More brain tissue, more processing power, more capacity for the kind of thinking that long-distance movement and environmental adaptation require. But bigger brains come with costs. Brain tissue is metabolically expensive. It requires enormous amounts of energy relative to its mass. In modern humans, the brain uses about 20% of the body's total energy budget, despite being only about 2% of body mass. So how did Homo erectus afford bigger brains? Two ways. First, cooking, as we mentioned, made nutrients more accessible. Cooked food delivers more calories per gram than raw food, and it's easier to digest, freeing up energy that would otherwise go to the digestive system. Second, their bodies changed in other ways to support brain growth. Their guts got smaller. The digestive system shortened and simplified because cooked food requires less processing. The energy that would have gone into maintaining a long, complex gut could instead support a larger brain. This is called the expensive tissue hypothesis, and it suggests that human brain evolution was only possible because cooking allowed us to reduce the energy costs of digestion. Homo erectus was living this trade-off for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans even appeared. Cook food, shrink gut, grow brain. Over and over, generation after generation, the populations that were better at this trade-off left more descendants than those that weren't. Natural selection favoured the fire users, the cookers, the ones who could afford bigger brains because they'd solved the energy equation. But let's not get too focused on brains, because one of the lessons of Homo erectus is that brain size isn't everything. They had smaller brains than us, and they lasted 7 times longer. Maybe because they weren't spending all their cognitive energy on innovation and complexity and trying to reshape the world. Maybe because they were using their brains for what brains evolved for. Navigating social relationships, remembering where resources are, making tools that work, coordinating group activities, surviving. Practical intelligence, embodied knowledge, the kind of smarts that keeps you alive rather than the kind that wins you accolades for creativity. And this brings us to their tools. Because if you want to understand Homo erectus's approach to survival, you have to understand their relationship with technology. The hand axe. We mentioned it in part 1, but it deserves more attention because it's the defining tool of the Lower Paleolithic, the technology that Homo erectus used for well over 1 million years with remarkably little variation. It's shaped like a teardrop, roughly symmetrical, sharp on both edges, pointed at one end and rounded at the other. The size varies, from palm size to larger than your hand, but the basic design remains constant. And it's not just found in one location. Hand axes appear everywhere Homo erectus went. Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Western Asia. Wherever they establish themselves, the hand axe appears in the archaeological record. And here's what's remarkable. The design stays the same for over 1 million years. You could teach someone to make a hand axe using a specimen from 1.5 million years ago, or one from 500,000 years ago. and the instructions would be nearly identical. Choose the right stone, strike it at the right angle, thin it gradually, shape it symmetrically. The technique is stable across time and space. This drives some archaeologists crazy. They want to see innovation, development, the kind of technological progress that shows increasing cognitive sophistication. But Homo erectus doesn't give them that. Hand axes just keep being hand axes, made the same way generation after generation, reliable and unchanging. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the stability is the innovation. Maybe figuring out a tool design that works in every environment you encounter, that can be made from almost any stone that serves multiple functions, and then sticking with it, that's actually the smart strategy for long-term survival. Because innovation is risky. New tool designs might be better in some contexts, but they might fail in others. They require learning, experimentation, time invested in figuring out what works. And if you're already using tools that work, if your hand axes successfully butcher meat and scrape hides and dig up tubers and cut wood, why change? Modern humans love to innovate. We're constantly developing new tools, new technologies, new ways of doing things. We treat innovation as inherently good, as progress, as evidence of our superiority. But innovation also means obsolescence. It means throwing away tools and knowledge that worked in favour of tools and knowledge that might work better, but might also fail spectacularly. Homo erectus didn't play that game. They found a technology that worked, and they kept it, maintained it, perfected it through tiny incremental improvements over hundreds of thousands of years. And that conservatism, that resistance to unnecessary change, might be part of why they lasted so long. There's wisdom in stability, in not fixing what isn't broken, in trusting accumulated knowledge over novel ideas. Modern humans have mostly lost this wisdom. We assume newer is better, that change equals progress, that standing still means falling behind. But Homo erectus proves that's not always true. Sometimes standing still, maintaining what works, conserving energy and effort for problems that actually need solving, that's the path to endurance. Of course, they did make other tools too. Flakes struck from larger cores, sharp-edged and effective for cutting. Scrapers for working hides. Simple wooden spears, though these rarely survive in the archaeological record. Their toolkit wasn't limited to hand axes, but the hand axe was the centre, the reliable tool that appeared in every context, that could handle most tasks with reasonable efficiency. And they knew how to make these tools well. The archaeological record shows that tool-making skill improved over time, that later Homo erectus populations produced more symmetrical, more refined hand axes than earlier populations. This wasn't biological evolution. This was cultural evolution, the slow accumulation and transmission of technique, the refinement of craft across generations. But it was slow cultural evolution, not the rapid, explosive changes we see in modern human technology. Just steady improvement, each generation slightly better than the last. Knowledge building incrementally, without ever abandoning the core design. This is what sustainable cultural transmission looks like. Not memorizing abstract information or passing down written instructions, just watching, practicing, making mistakes, learning from corrections, gradually getting better. And it works. For 1,000,000 years, it works. Let's shift perspective for a moment. Let's think about what it would have been like to be a child growing up in a Homo erectus group. You're born after a long pregnancy, about as long as modern human pregnancies. Your mother has been preparing, maybe making a slightly more sheltered sleeping area, gathering extra food in the days before birth. The birth itself is difficult because you have a relatively large head trying to pass through a pelvis that's adapted for bipedal walking. This is the obstetrical dilemma, and it's been making childbirth challenging for hominins for millions of years. But you make it through, and for the first few years of your life, you're completely dependent on your mother. You nurse frequently, you're carried everywhere, clinging to her back or held in her arms. You sleep close to her at night, warm and safe against her body. This extended childhood, this long period of dependency, is part of the package that comes with bigger brains. Human infants are born relatively helpless compared to other mammals because if they develop much more in the womb, Their heads would be too large to pass through the birth canal. So much of brain development happens after birth, during this long childhood when you're learning from observation and practice, and learn you do. From the moment you can focus your eyes, you're watching. The adults making tools, the older children foraging, the way people interact, communicate, share. You're absorbing patterns, forming the neural connections that will guide your behavior for the rest of your life. By age 3 or 4, you're starting to participate. Not in hunting or complex tool making, but in gathering, carrying things, helping with simple tasks. You're learning where the good foraging areas are, which plants are edible, how to recognize the signs of water. The adults correct you when you make mistakes, guide you toward better choices, but mostly you learn by doing, by trial and error, by repeated practice. By adolescence, you're competent at most survival skills. You can make tools, though not as well as the adults. You can find food, you can contribute to group activities, and you're beginning to take on adult responsibilities, hunting with the men, foraging with the women, participating in the decisions about when to move camp or which direction to travel. And then you have children of your own, and the cycle continues. You teach them what you were taught, show them what you were shown, pass on the knowledge that was passed to you. Nothing is written down, nothing is formalized, but the essential information flows from generation to generation, reliable as the seasons, unchanged in its fundamentals even as small improvements accumulate. This is how cultures can persist for hundreds of thousands of years without writing or formal institutions. Through direct transmission, observation, practice, correction. It's not as efficient as written knowledge. It's vulnerable to disruption if too many knowledgeable individuals die at once, but it's robust enough, reliable enough, to carry essential survival information across timeframes that make modern civilization look ephemeral. Your entire life, from birth to death, is spent with the same group of people, or groups closely connected through kinship and regular interaction. You never meet strangers, never encounter populations with radically different ways of life, never have to navigate complex social situations with unknown individuals. This might sound limiting, even claustrophobic to modern sensibilities, but it creates a kind of social security that we've mostly lost. Everyone knows everyone, reputations are clear, relationships are stable. You don't have to constantly assess new people or navigate unfamiliar social contexts. You know your place, your role, and your connections, and that stability, that predictability, it reduces social stress, makes cooperation easier, creates the foundation for long-term group cohesion. Homo erectus lived this way for 2 million years. Small groups, face-to-face relationships, stable social structures, and it worked, not just for individuals but for the species as a whole. Now, we're simplifying. We're taking fragmentary evidence and constructing narratives that smooth over the complexity and variation that surely existed across 2 million years and 2 continents. Different populations probably lived somewhat differently, developed local variations in tools, in diet, in social organization. The Homo erectus in tropical Africa probably differed in meaningful ways from the Homo erectus in temperate Europe or tropical Asia, but the core pattern holds. Wherever they went, they carried with them a basic approach to survival. Endurance locomotion, cooperative groups, conservative technology, flexible adaptation without dramatic innovation. Practical knowledge transmitted through observation and practice. And it worked everywhere they tried it. This is what endurance looks like. Not exciting, not heroic, not innovative. Just reliable, sustainable, good enough to keep going through whatever the world throws at you. And it raises the question we'll explore more in the coming parts. If this approach worked so well for so long, why did Homo erectus eventually go extinct? And why did they get replaced by species like us, who do everything differently, who innovate constantly, who reshape environments instead of adapting to them, who've lasted a fraction of the time but dominate the planet? Is our way better, or just different? Is our success measured in the right terms, or are we confusing short-term dominance with long-term survival? Homo erectus can't answer these questions. They're gone. But their 2 million year run, their long, slow endurance through ice ages and climate chaos and environmental change, it suggests that there are multiple paths to survival. And maybe the path that lasts longest isn't the one that burns brightest. The fire is dying down now. The embers glow softly in the darkness. The group has settled for sleep, bodies close, the quiet breathing of people who trust each other, who know they'll face tomorrow together, who've never questioned that this is how life is lived. 2 million years of nights like this. 2 million years of fires and food and fellowship. 2 million years of walking, adapting, enduring. And then it ended. But while it lasted, it was more successful than anything that came before or since. Let that settle as you drift. The long endurance, the patient persistence, the wisdom of being enough without needing to be more. Homo erectus knew something we're still trying to learn. And in the next part, we'll see what happened when that knowledge met its limits, when endurance finally failed, when 2 million years came to an end. But for now, rest. The ancient ones walked their 2 million years. We're still walking ours, and the night is long enough for both stories. Here's where it gets more complex, because we've been talking about Homo erectus as if they lived in a stable world, as if their 2 million years unfolded in unchanging conditions where persistence and conservative strategies were enough. But that's not what happened. That's not what those 2 million years were like at all. The planet changed around the limb, dramatically, repeatedly, in ways that would test every adaptation they'd developed, every strategy they'd refined, every assumption they'd made about how the world works. Let's talk about ice. You're living in Europe maybe 900,000 years ago. Your ancestors have been here for tens of thousands of years, maybe longer. The archaeological record is sparse, but there are signs of Homo erectus presence across the Mediterranean and into the temperate zones to the north. They have adapted to cooler climates than their tropical African ancestors knew, developed strategies for dealing with seasonal variation, learned which animals to hunt and which plants remain edible through the colder months. And then the climate starts to shift. Gradually at first, winters get slightly longer, summers slightly cooler, snow lingers in the mountains later into spring, rivers freeze harder and longer. The changes are subtle enough that no single generation notices a dramatic difference, but over centuries, over millennia, the trend becomes undeniable. And the ice is coming. This isn't the first ice age Homo erectus has weathered. It won't be the last. But each one is a test, a challenge that asks, are your adaptations good enough? Is your knowledge sufficient? Can you endure this? The glaciers advance slowly, grinding down from the polar regions, covering Scandinavia, pushing into Central Europe, transforming familiar landscapes into frozen wastes. Sea levels drop as water locks up in ice, coastlines extend outward, islands become connected to continents, the entire geography of the world reshapes itself. And Homo erectus, already living at the edge of their cold climate tolerance, has to make choices. Some populations retreat. They move south, following the warmth, abandoning territories their ancestors held for thousands of generations. This isn't a panicked flight. It's a gradual drift, groups spending more time in southern ranges, less time returning to now inhospitable northern areas, until eventually the northern territories are abandoned entirely. Other populations adapt in place, developing new strategies for surviving in conditions that push the limits of what's possible without complex clothing or insulated shelters. They learn to use caves more extensively, natural shelters that provide protection from the worst of the wind and cold. They maintain larger fires, gathering more wood, keeping flames burning longer. They hunt different animals, species adapted to cold that provide denser fat, warmer pelts. And some populations don't make it. The archaeological record shows this in the gaps, in sites that were occupied for thousands of years and then suddenly go quiet, showing no signs of human presence for tens of thousands of years afterward. These are the populations that couldn't adapt, that couldn't retreat fast enough, that got caught in changing conditions they couldn't survive. This is natural selection operating not just on individuals but on populations, on entire regional groups of Homo erectus. The populations with the right combination of flexibility and conservatism that could adapt without abandoning proven strategies, those are the ones that persist. The ones that were too rigid or too experimental, they vanish. But here's what's remarkable. Across multiple ice ages, separated by hundreds of thousands of years, Homo erectus comes through. Not everywhere, not every population, but enough. The species survives, and when the ice retreats, when the glaciers melt and sea levels rise and temperate conditions return, Homo erectus populations expand again, reoccupying territories that were abandoned for 50,000 years or more. They don't have cultural memory of those territories. The groups that return aren't descended from the groups that left. They're just expanding into newly habitable areas, following the same patterns of gradual geographic spread that their ancestors followed a million years earlier. The knowledge is lost, but the strategy remains, and the strategy works. This is resilience at a species level, not about any individual group surviving every challenge, but about enough populations persisting somewhere that the species as a whole endures. It's distributed survival, geographic redundancy, the biological equivalent of not putting all your eggs in one basket, and it required something that modern humans might be losing. The ability to live lightly enough that abandoning a territory doesn't mean collapse, the flexibility to move when conditions change, the lack of dependence on any single location or resource or strategy. Homo erectus could walk away from places their ancestors lived for millennia, because they weren't tied to permanent settlements, agricultural fields, complex infrastructure. Everything they needed, they carried. The knowledge in their heads, the skills in their hands, the tools they could remake anywhere. Their survival wasn't location dependent. It was portable, adaptable, resilient, but ice wasn't the only test. Let's shift locations and time. Africa, 700,000 years ago. The climate is swinging the other way now. Drought. This isn't a single dry year or even a dry decade. This is a climate shift that lasts for millennia, transforming grasslands into deserts, shrinking lakes into mudflats, driving animals into smaller and smaller refugia where water still flows. And Homo erectus, still present across much of Africa, has to respond. Water becomes everything, not just for drinking, though that's critical, but as a map, a navigation system, a predictor of where animals will congregate and plants will grow. Groups that can find water, that can remember where it persists even in dry years, that can read the landscape for signs of underground springs or seasonal streams. Those groups survive, others don't. The fossil record shows population declines during these drought periods, evidence that some groups couldn't adapt to the new reality. But the species persists, concentrated around the remaining water sources, their population reduced but their knowledge intact. And when the rains return, when the climate swings back toward wetter conditions, the populations expand again. Not as quickly as they contracted, because population growth is slow when you're raising children one at a time with years between births, but steadily, generation by generation, reoccupying the ranges that were abandoned during the drought. This pattern, contraction and expansion, retreat and advance, it plays out over and over across the 2 million years. Ice ages push populations south or into refugia. Droughts concentrate them around water sources. Volcanic eruptions, like the massive Toba eruption about 74,000 years ago, create years of cooling and reduced sunlight that stress populations across entire regions. And each time, some populations don't make it. Some groups find themselves in areas where the changes are too severe, too rapid, where even the most flexible adaptations aren't sufficient. They die out, leaving gaps in the archaeological record, sites that go silent and stay silent. But somewhere, somehow, enough populations survive, the species endures. Not because every group is perfectly adapted to every possible challenge, but because there's always somewhere conditions remain survivable. And Homo erectus is present in enough places that they find those refugia, those pockets of habitability that carry them through the crisis. This is how you survive 2 million years. Not by being perfectly adapted to one environment, but by being good enough across many environments. Not by controlling conditions, but by being flexible enough to move, to adapt, to find the places where survival remains possible. It's a fundamentally different approach than the one modern humans take. We reshape environments to suit us. We build cities in deserts and pump in water. We create artificial climates inside our buildings. We develop technologies to overcome local limitations. And when environments become challenging, we don't retreat. We double down, engineering solutions, convinced that our cleverness can overcome any limitation. Homo erectus didn't do that. They accepted environmental limitations. When a region became uninhabitable, they left. When conditions improved, they returned. They didn't fight nature. They moved with it, around it, accepting that some places at some time simply weren't survivable for their species. And maybe this acceptance, this willingness to retreat rather than insisting on dominance, this is part of why they lasted so long. Because environmental change is inevitable. Ice ages come and go, droughts cycle, volcanic eruptions happen, sea levels fluctuate. And species that can roll with these changes, that don't commit themselves irreversibly to specific locations, those species have staying power. But let's look at something else that tests a species over deep time. Let's talk about competition. Homo erectus wasn't alone on this planet. For much of their existence, they shared the world with other hominin species, other members of the human family tree, populations that were hunting the same animals, gathering the same plants, competing for the same resources. Early in their run, before about 1 million years ago, there were other Homo species in Africa. Homo habilis, smaller-brained, more primitive in their anatomy, but still tool-using, still upright-walking, still human enough that they occupied similar ecological niches to early Homo erectus. We don't know how they interacted, whether they avoided each other or competed directly, or interbred or coexisted peacefully. The fossil record doesn't preserve social interactions, but by about 1 million years ago, those other species are gone. Homo erectus is the only Homo species in Africa, at least as far as we can tell from the fragments of fossils we've found. Did Homo erectus outcompete them? Drive them extinct through superior adaptations? Or did they just outlast them through the steady accumulation of small advantages across hundreds of thousands of years? We don't know, but the result is clear. Homo erectus endured, the others didn't. And then, starting around 700,000 years ago, new species begin to appear. Homo heidelbergensis emerges, probably from Homo erectus populations in Africa or Europe, with larger brains and more sophisticated tools. By 400,000 years ago, this species has spread across Africa and Europe, overlapping with Homo erectus in many regions. And Homo erectus starts to decline. Not everywhere, not immediately, but gradually the archaeological evidence for their presence becomes sparser. In Africa and Europe, sites that were once dominated by Homo erectus hand axes start showing the more advanced tools of Homo heidelbergensis. It's a slow transition, taking tens of thousands of years, but the direction is clear. The newer species is replacing the older one. Was this direct competition? Did groups encounter each other and fight for resources? Or was it more subtle? Homo heidelbergensis, simply being slightly more efficient at finding food, slightly more successful at raising children to adulthood, producing slightly larger populations that gradually filled the landscape while Homo erectus populations remained stable or declined. Again, we don't know. Violence doesn't fossilize well, but the outcome is clear. By about 300,000 years ago, Homo erectus is gone from Africa and Europe. The species that dominated those continents for more than 1 million years has been displaced by descendant populations with bigger brains and fancier tools. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because while Homo erectus was disappearing from Africa and Europe, they were still present in Asia, Indonesia, the islands of Southeast Asia. They hung on there, isolated by geography from the newer species expanding across the western continents. And they lasted. The most recent evidence for Homo erectus comes from Java, from sites like Ngandong and Sambung Makan, dated to somewhere between 117,000 and 108,000 years ago, maybe even later. The dating is uncertain, complicated by the tropical conditions that make preservation and accurate dating difficult, but the implication is stunning. Homo erectus, the species that emerged nearly 2 million years ago, was still present on this planet until maybe 100,000 years ago. They overlapped in time with Neanderthals, who were thriving in Europe. They overlapped with Denisovans, spreading across Asia. And they overlapped with early modern humans, who were just beginning to spread out of Africa. 3 human species, or 4 if you count late surviving Homo erectus as distinct enough from their earlier populations, all alive at the same time, each adapted to their own regions, each following their own survival strategies. And then modern humans arrived in Southeast Asia, probably between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago. And shortly after, Homo erectus vanishes from the record. Coincidence or cause and effect? Did modern humans outcompete the last Homo erectus populations? Hunt them, displace them, absorb them through interbreeding until they no longer existed as a distinct population? We don't know. The evidence is too fragmentary, but the timing is suggestive. Wherever modern humans spread, older human species tended to disappear. Not immediately, there were thousands of years of overlap, but eventually the pattern held. Modern humans persisted, everyone else went extinct. This is the final test Homo erectus couldn't pass. Not ice ages, not droughts, not volcanic eruptions, but competition with a species that was too similar to coexist with, too efficient at the same survival strategies, too capable of innovation and adaptation. Homo erectus had lasted 2 million years against everything nature threw at them, but they couldn't last against us. And that raises uncomfortable questions, because if we're the species that ended the 2 million year run of the endurance specialists, if our innovations and adaptability and rapid change made us so successful that we displaced every other human species that existed, what does that say about our own survival prospects? Are we the clever upstarts who'll burn bright and brief and then vanish, leaving behind nothing but archaeological traces for whatever species comes next? Or have we found a genuinely better strategy, one that can match Homo erectus's endurance while adding the benefits of rapid innovation? We're 300,000 years in. We won't know the answer until we're 2 million years in, if we make it that far. But let's shift perspective again. Let's think about what all these environmental tests, all these climate changes and population contractions and geographic retreats, what they must have felt like from the inside, from the perspective of individuals living through them. You're a member of a Homo erectus group facing a multi-generational drought. You've never known truly wet conditions. The stories passed down from your grandparents' generation speak of fuller rivers, more abundant plant growth, but those are just stories. Your reality is dry stream beds, sparse vegetation, constant searching for water. You don't understand climate cycles. You don't know that this drought will eventually end, that the rains will return in some future generation's lifetime. You just know that water is scarce and getting scarcer, that the group has to travel farther between water sources, that more children are dying young, that the old people who used to make it into their 30s or even 40s are dying younger now, their bodies unable to handle the stress of dehydration and reduced food. Do you feel despair? Probably not in the complex, existential way modern humans might. Your emotional range is likely simpler, more immediate. You feel thirst when you're thirsty, fear when danger is near, relief when you find water. But do you feel the cumulative weight of generations of hardship? Do you sense that your world is harder than it should be? We can't know. Emotional life doesn't fossilize. But the fact that you keep going, keep looking for water, keep raising children, even in difficult conditions, that suggests something. Resilience. Not as a philosophical choice, but as a basic part of your nature. You endure because enduring is what you do, what your species has always done, and maybe that's the key to understanding how Homo erectus lasted so long. They didn't need to understand why conditions were hard or when they might improve. They just needed to keep doing what worked, day after day, generation after generation, trusting in nothing except the basic strategies that had carried their ancestors through previous challenges. This is survival without hope, without the expectation of better conditions, without the belief that things will improve, just persistence, just continuing, just being there tomorrow because you were here today. It's bleak in a way, but it's also powerful, because hope can be fragile. Expectations can be disappointed. Beliefs about the future can prove wrong, but simple persistence, the refusal to give up even when conditions are terrible, that can carry you through anything that doesn't literally kill you. Homo erectus didn't need the complex motivational structures that modern humans build. They didn't need meaning or purpose or belief in progress. They just needed to keep going. And for 2 million years, they did. But there's another layer to this. Because while individual groups might have experienced hardship and decline, the species as a whole was maintained through the success of populations in more favourable regions. The groups suffering through droughts in East Africa weren't aware that Homo erectus populations in Southeast Asia were thriving. The groups retreating from advancing glaciers in Europe didn't know that their cousins in Africa were expanding into new territories. This geographic distribution, this spreading of the species across vast distances, it meant that Homo erectus was never entirely dependent on conditions in any single region. When Africa was in drought, Asia might be stable. When Europe was freezing under ice, the tropics remained habitable. The species survived not because every population could endure every challenge, but because there was always somewhere conditions remained survivable. This is perhaps the most important lesson of Homo erectus's long run. Resilience through distribution. Survival through redundancy. The understanding, whether conscious or just the result of evolutionary pressure, that putting all your eggs in one basket is dangerous over geological timeframes. And modern humans, for all our cleverness, might be violating this principle. We're more widespread than Homo erectus ever was. True. We've colonized every continent, adapted to every climate, established ourselves in the most inhospitable corners of the planet. But we've also become interconnected in ways that make us vulnerable to cascading failures. Our food systems depend on global supply chains. Our technologies require resources extracted from specific locations. Our populations are concentrated in cities that require constant input of food and energy and water from distant sources. If something disrupts those systems, climate change or pandemic or political collapse, or some crisis we haven't imagined yet, how resilient are we really? Could human populations survive if global trade networks collapsed? Could cities endure without the agricultural hinterlands that feed them? Could modern civilization persist if the complex technological infrastructure we depend on failed? Homo erectus could have answered yes to all these questions, because they didn't depend on complex systems. They didn't need trade networks or agricultural production or technological infrastructure. They just needed knowledge, tools, social groups, and environments with available resources. Lose a population, and the species continued elsewhere. Lose a region, and other regions remained inhabitable. We've traded that resilience for efficiency and power, and the abilities to support massive populations, and maybe that's a good trade. Maybe our complex systems will prove stable enough, adaptable enough, that will match or exceed Homo erectus's run, but maybe not. Maybe we're building a house of cards that will collapse the first time something shakes the foundation. Only time will tell. And time, as Homo erectus proved, operates on scales that make individual human lives and even civilization seem ephemeral. The tests keep coming even now for our species. Climate change, resource depletion, population pressure, political instability, technological risks. Each one a challenge that asks, are your adaptations good enough? Is your knowledge sufficient? Can you endure this? Homo erectus faced their tests and passed most of them for 2 million years. We've faced ours for 300,000 years. The experiment continues. The results remain uncertain. But as you lie there in the darkness, maybe you can appreciate what they accomplished. The sheer stubbornness of existing through ice ages and droughts and volcanic winters and competition with other species, the patient accumulation of knowledge across timeframes that dwarf recorded history, the wisdom of being flexible enough to adapt but conservative enough to maintain what works. They're gone now. The last Homo erectus individual died thousands of years before the first pyramid was built, before writing was invented, before humans developed agriculture or built cities or created any of the things we think of as civilization. They never knew that their 2 million-year run would end. They just kept going until they couldn't anymore. And we inherited the world they walked through, the planet they learned to survive on, the ecological niches they carved out and then abandoned or were driven from. We walk in their footsteps, literally, following some of the same routes across continents, occupying some of the same caves and river valleys and coastal plains. But we walk differently, faster, more boldly, with more confidence in our cleverness and less patience for the slow accumulation of knowledge across generations. We innovate where they conserved. We dominate where they adapted. We reshape where they accommodated. And maybe our way is better. Maybe we found the secret to endurance that eluded them. Or maybe we're just loud and bright and impressive in the short term, and the real test, the 2 million-year test, is still ahead of us. The night deepens, your breathing slows, and somewhere in the darkness the echo of 2 million years of footsteps, of campfires burning, of groups gathering and moving, and enduring through changes we can barely imagine. Homo erectus walked through it all, and then they were gone, leaving us to wonder whether their way or our way holds the real secret to lasting. In the next part, we'll bring this home. We'll talk about what it all means for you lying here now, a member of the species that replaced them, the species that has barely started its own long walk through time. But for now, just rest. The tests will come, they always do, and how we respond will determine whether we join Homo erectus in the long list of extinct human species, or whether we find our own way to endure. The ancient ones are gone, but their story remains, written in stone, waiting for us to read and understand and maybe, if we're wise enough, learn from. Sleep now. Tomorrow comes soon enough. And with it, another day in our own species' experiment with survival. Let's bring this forward to your life, to you, lying there tonight in the 21st century, surrounded by technology and comfort and the infrastructure of modern civilization. Because the story of Homo erectus isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror, showing us what we've traded away in our rush toward complexity and innovation. And it starts with something simple, something you might have felt at some point in your life without quite understanding why. You've probably experienced this. You're in nature, maybe camping or hiking away from cities and roads and the constant hum of civilization, and you feel something. Not just relaxation, though there's that, but something deeper, a sense of rightness, of being where you're supposed to be, of your body and mind operating in a mode they were designed for. That feeling, that's not mystical. That's not romantic nostalgia for some imagined simpler past. That's your Homo erectus inheritance. The genetic and neurological wiring that evolved over 2 million years of living in small groups, moving through natural landscapes, relying on fire and tools and direct knowledge of the environment. Your body expects to walk long distances, to regulate temperature through movement and sweating rather than climate control, to sleep when darkness falls and wake with the sun, to eat food you can recognize as once having been alive, plants and animals, not processed substances optimized for shelf life and profit margin. Your brain expects to navigate complex natural environments, reading weather patterns and tracking animal behavior and identifying plants. To engage in face-to-face social interaction with people you know personally. To solve concrete physical problems with your hands rather than abstract symbolic problems with screens and keyboards. Your nervous system expects periods of real exertion followed by periods of genuine rest. Challenges that have clear outcomes. Dangers you can see and respond to rather than ambient anxieties about abstract future threats. For 2 million years, this is what being human meant. Walking, gathering, hunting, sitting around fires, sleeping under stars, knowing everyone in your group, understanding the landscape you move through, living in the immediate present with only the thinnest thread of planning for tomorrow. And then, in the last 10,000 years, everything changed. Agriculture, cities, division of labour, specialisation, writing, institutions, technology. The entire structure of human life transformed in a fraction of the time Homo erectus existed. Your body hasn't caught up, your brain hasn't caught up, you're running Homo erectus hardware with modern human software, and the mismatch creates problems you might not recognise as stemming from evolutionary lag. Let's walk through some of them. You wake up in the morning in a climate-controlled room. The temperature hasn't varied more than a few degrees all night. No cold, no heat, no need for your body to regulate its temperature through shivering or sweating. You stand up from a soft mattress that supports your body in ways natural sleeping surfaces never did. Your feet touch carpet or smooth floor, not earth or grass or stone. Already your body is confused. Where is the cold morning air that should shock your system awake? Where are the uneven surfaces that should engage the small stabilizing muscles in your feet and ankles? Where is the gradual lightening of the sky that should have been signaling your circadian rhythm for hours before you actually opened your eyes? You check your phone immediately. Bright artificial light, blue spectrum, signals to your brain that it's midday even though it might be dawn or still dark outside. You scroll through messages, news, social media, exposing yourself to more information in 5 minutes than a Homo erectus individual would encounter in a month. Different people, different places, different concerns, all demanding your attention, all creating small spikes of stress hormones as your brain tries to assess each potential threat or opportunity. Your nervous system is activating, heart rate increasing slightly, cortisol rising, your body preparing for action, for response, for dealing with the hundreds of small demands it thinks it's facing. But you're not taking action. You're just lying there, scrolling, absorbing information without resolution, creating a backlog of unresolved stimuli that your brain doesn't know how to process. Homo erectus never experienced this. Their information came in manageable chunks. The weather they could see and feel, the food they could eat or not eat, the people they interacted with face to face. Everything was concrete, immediate, resolvable. They didn't carry the weight of distant concerns, abstract problems, other people's crises broadcast to them through technology. You get up, shower in temperature-controlled water, dry yourself with soft cloth, put on clothes designed for fashion or professional appearance rather than practical protection from the elements. You eat breakfast, probably processed food, possibly while still looking at screens, taking in more information, more stimulation, more demands on attention. And then you get in a vehicle or on public transport and travel to wherever you work. You sit mostly, in the vehicle, at a desk, in meetings, your body designed for walking hours every day covering distances, using major muscle groups in varied terrain, instead remains largely stationary. Your back compresses, your hip flexors tighten, your feet meant to grip uneven ground rest flat on smooth surfaces. This is what modern life looks like. And from the perspective of your Homo erectus inheritance, it's deeply strange. Unnatural in the literal sense that nothing about it matches the conditions your body and brain evolved to handle. The mismatch creates problems. Let's name them. Chronic low-level stress. Your nervous system evolved to respond to acute threats. Lion in the grass, stranger from another group approaching, storm coming. These are immediate concrete dangers that require immediate concrete responses. Fight, flee, take shelter. And then, when the danger passes, your stress response shuts down. Cortisol drops, heart rate normalizes, your body recovers. But modern threats aren't like that. Job insecurity, financial pressures, political instability, climate change, these are chronic, abstract, unresolvable through individual physical action. Your nervous system can't distinguish between a lion in the grass and a threatening email from your boss. Both activate stress responses, but you can't fight or flee from the email. You can only sit there, feeling the activation without resolution, your body preparing for action that never comes. And this happens over and over, day after day, year after year. chronic activation of stress systems that were meant to fire briefly and then shut down. The result is what we call chronic stress, and it manifests in ways your body was never designed to handle. Inflammation, disrupted sleep, compromised immune function, cardiovascular strain, anxiety, depression. Homo erectus felt stress certainly, fear when predators were near, anxiety during droughts when food was scarce, the pressure of survival in challenging conditions, but these were real immediate threats with clear responses: find safety, find water, keep moving. And when the threat passed, so did the stress. You don't get that resolution. The threats in your life are ongoing, abstract, always present in the background. And your Homo erectus nervous system doesn't know how to handle this. It just keeps activating, keeps flooding your system with stress hormones, keeps preparing you for action you can't take. Or consider loneliness, social isolation. You might live in a city with millions of people. You might have hundreds of social media connections. You might interact with dozens of individuals every day, and yet you might feel profoundly alone, because your brain doesn't count interactions with strangers as real social connection. It doesn't recognize brief transactional exchanges as meaningful relationship building. It doesn't register online communication as equivalent to face-to-face interaction, no matter how frequent or lengthy. Your brain expects to know everyone you interact with, to have ongoing relationships with a stable group of people you see regularly, whose faces and voices and moods you can read directly, whose presence provides actual physical comfort and security. That's what Homo erectus had. Small groups, maybe 30 to 50 individuals, everyone known, everyone connected through kinship and long-term association. You have hundreds of shallow connections instead. People you work with but don't know personally. Neighbours whose names you might not know. Online friends you've never met in person. A constant stream of new faces in public spaces, none of whom represent real social bonds. And your brain registers this as isolation. Because from its perspective, you are isolated. You don't have a tribe. You don't have the deep, ongoing, reliable social connections that human brains evolved to depend on for security and well-being. So you feel lonely even in crowds, disconnected even when constantly communicating, unsupported even when surrounded by people. Because the quality of connection that would satisfy your Homo erectus wiring simply isn't there in modern life for most people. Or think about your relationship with food. Homo erectus ate when food was available. They had lean times and abundant times. Their bodies stored fat efficiently during abundance to carry them through scarcity. Their metabolisms adjusted to variable caloric intake. This was adaptive for a lifestyle where food supply was unpredictable. But you have constant food availability, calorie-dense options at every moment, processed foods engineered to be maximally palatable, triggering reward systems that evolved to make you eat as much fat and sugar as possible because those calories were rare and precious in ancestral environments. Your body doesn't know that scarcity isn't coming. It doesn't understand that the next meal is guaranteed, that you don't need to store every possible calorie because you can eat again in a few hours. So it keeps signaling hunger, keeps driving you to eat more, keeps storing fat for the famine that never arrives. And the result is obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all the metabolic disorders that stem from bodies optimized for occasional abundance and frequent scarcity trying to function in conditions of constant abundance and zero scarcity. Homo erectus never dealt with this. They had the opposite problem, managing to get enough calories to survive, let alone thrive. The diseases of overconsumption were impossible in their world. But in yours, they're epidemic because your Homo erectus body is still behaving as if the next drought might start tomorrow. Or consider decision-making, choice. Homo erectus faced relatively few choices in their daily lives. Where to travel based on known patterns of resource availability, which animals to pursue based on immediate opportunity, how to divide food based on established social norms. Most of life was routine, predictable, governed by patterns that had worked for thousands of generations. You faced dozens of decisions every hour. What to eat, what to wear, what to work on, how to respond to messages, What to buy, what to watch, what to read, where to go, who to spend time with. Endless options, constant choice, the burden of selecting from possibilities that would have been unimaginable to your ancestors. And each choice activates decision-making circuits in your brain. Each requires energy, attention, consideration. The accumulation of choices, even trivial ones, creates mental fatigue, decision exhaustion. You end your day drained not from physical exertion, but from the sheer volume of decisions you've navigated. Homo erectus didn't experience this. Their cognitive energy went into concrete problems, making tools, finding food, navigating terrain, managing social relationships, not into arbitrating between 47 different breakfast cereals or deciding which streaming service to subscribe to or choosing among 200 career paths. And maybe this is part of why modern humans report such high levels of anxiety and exhaustion despite having material comfort Homo erectus could never have imagined. We're cognitively overwhelmed by choice, by possibility, by the constant demand to decide among options that matter very little in the long term, but feel pressing in the moment. But it's not just individual problems. The mismatch between Homo erectus wiring and modern life creates collective problems too. Think about our relationship with the environment. Homo erectus lived lightly on the land. They took what they needed and moved on, allowing resources to recover. They maintained stable populations that their environments could support. They didn't reshape landscapes to suit themselves. They adapted to what was there. This wasn't virtue. This wasn't environmental consciousness or ethical commitment to sustainability. This was just how life worked when you lacked the technology to do otherwise. But the result was 2 million years of human presence that didn't exhaust resources, or collapse ecosystems, or drive mass extinctions. We do all of those things. Modern humans have transformed the planet in 10,000 years more than any other species has in the entire history of complex life. We've cleared forests, redirected rivers, reshaped coastlines, altered the chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans, driven species to extinction at rates not seen since asteroid impacts ended the dinosaurs. And we do this because we can, because we have the technology, the population, the organizational capacity to reshape the world to our specifications. We don't accept environmental limitations. We overcome them, engineer around them, force the planet to support human activities at scales that would have been impossible for Homo erectus. But here's the question. Is this sustainable for 2 million years? Could our current approach to the environment persist across the time frames that Homo erectus endured? Or are we consuming, reshaping, exhausting at rates that guarantee collapse long before we reach even 500,000 years, let alone 2 million? The evidence is troubling. Climate change accelerating faster than predicted. Biodiversity loss approaching crisis levels. Resource depletion, especially of easily accessible fossil fuels and minerals. Ocean acidification, soil degradation, freshwater scarcity. The list of environmental challenges we've created is long and getting longer. And our response is more innovation, more technology, more engineering. The belief that we can invent our way out of every problem, that there's always a technical solution if we're just clever enough to find it. Maybe we're right. Maybe human innovation is powerful enough to overcome any limitation, solve any problem, find pathways to sustainability that don't require giving up our complex civilization. Maybe we'll prove that rapid innovation is more effective for long-term survival than Homo erectus's conservative stability. But maybe not. Maybe we're burning through resources and disrupting systems in ways that will come back to haunt our descendants. Maybe the planet has limits that even our cleverness can't overcome. Maybe there's a reckoning coming that will make our 300,000-year run look brief and our civilization look like a failed experiment in unsustainable complexity. Homo erectus never faced these questions because they never had the power to reshape their environment fundamentally. They had to live within the limits of what was available. And those limits, frustrating as they might have been, also prevented them from destroying the ecological foundations of their own survival. We've exceeded those limits, And we don't yet know whether that's liberation or suicide in slow motion. Or think about knowledge. How we learn and transmit what we know. Homo erectus used direct observation and practice. Children learned by watching adults, by imitating, by gradually acquiring skills through years of hands-on experience. Knowledge was embodied, practical, tied to concrete contexts. This is slow. It limits how much any individual can learn in a lifetime. It means innovation spread gradually, if at all. It prevents the kind of rapid cultural evolution that can respond quickly to changing conditions, but it also makes knowledge robust. Skills learned through direct practice, repeated thousands of times, become deeply ingrained. They are not easily forgotten. They don't require external storage or reference materials. Every individual carries essential survival knowledge in their muscle memory, their neural circuits, their practiced expertise. Modern humans use symbolic knowledge, writing, books, digital storage. We externalize information, storing it outside our bodies and brains. This allows us to accumulate vast amounts of knowledge across generations to build on the discoveries of our ancestors, to create complex systems of understanding that no individual could recreate from scratch. But it also makes us vulnerable. If the storage systems fail, if libraries burn or servers crash, or the infrastructure that maintains our knowledge repositories collapses, we lose access to information. And unlike Homo erectus knowledge, which was distributed across individuals, our knowledge is often specialized, concentrated in experts, not accessible to everyone. How many modern humans could survive if suddenly stripped of all technology and written knowledge? How many know how to make fire without matches, identify edible plants, track animals, make tools from stone, navigate by stars, understand weather patterns well enough to predict tomorrow's conditions? Very few. We've traded the robust, distributed knowledge of Homo erectus for the powerful but fragile knowledge systems of literate civilization. And that trade makes us efficient but vulnerable, capable of great achievements but dependent on systems that could fail. Homo erectus would have survived the collapse of civilization. They were civilization. Every individual carried what they needed to know. Every group was self-sufficient. There was no infrastructure to fail because there was no infrastructure. We've built something magnificent. Cities, science, art, philosophy, technology, all the achievements of human civilization. But we've built it on foundations that might not be as stable as we assume. And if those foundations crack, if the systems we depend on fail, our fall might be much harder than the decline of Homo erectus was, because we have so much further to fall. You might be thinking this is too dark, too pessimistic, and maybe it is. Maybe our innovations will save us, our cleverness will find solutions, our civilization will prove durable enough to match or exceed Homo erectus's endurance. But lying there in the dark, away from the noise and rush of daily life, maybe you can feel it, the fragility beneath the confidence, the sense that we're balanced on a knife edge, that our success is more precarious than we usually admit, that the difference between our 300,000 years and Homo erectus's 2 million years might be that they knew how to endure and we've only learned how to accelerate. Your body knows this. That's why you feel stressed even when you're materially comfortable. Why you feel disconnected even when you're constantly communicating. Why you feel tired even when you're not physically exhausted. Why you feel anxious about the future even when the present seems stable. Because at some level below conscious thought, your Homo erectus wiring is registering the mismatch. Recognizing that modern life doesn't match the conditions you evolved for. Sensing that something is wrong even when you can't articulate what it is, and that feeling, uncomfortable as it might be valuable, because it's telling you something true. That rapid change and constant innovation and the reshaping of every aspect of human life, these aren't automatically good just because they're impressive. That maybe there's wisdom in the old ways, in the conservative strategies that Homo erectus employed for 2 million years. That maybe endurance requires restraint, not constant pushing of boundaries. This isn't a call to abandon civilization and return to hunter-gatherer life. That's not possible for 8 billion people, and even if it were, we can't unknow what we know or unbuild what we've built. The modern world is what it is, but maybe it's a call to question our assumptions about progress, to wonder whether newer is always better, whether faster is always preferable, whether more complex is inherently superior to simpler. Homo erectus teaches us that long-term survival might require different values than short-term success, that endurance might matter more than innovation, that being good enough for millions of years might be more important than being brilliant for thousands. And that lesson, uncomfortable as it might be for a species that prides itself on its cleverness, might be exactly what we need to hear as we face the challenges of the coming centuries. Because the tests are coming. Climate change, resource limits, population pressures, political instabilities, technological risks. Each one asking the same question that ice ages and droughts asked Homo erectus. Are your adaptations good enough? Can you endure this? We've survived 300,000 years. We've built civilizations and technologies that would seem like magic to our ancestors. We've reshaped the planet and reached for the stars and unlocked the secrets of atoms and genes. But we haven't proven we can endure. Not yet. Not at the timescales that matter for species survival. Homo erectus walked the Earth for 2 million years. That's the benchmark. That's what long-term success looks like. And we're not even close to matching it. The night deepens around you. Your body relaxes despite the uncomfortable thoughts, because that's what bodies do. They handle stress in the moment and then let it go, returning to baseline, preparing for the next day. Your Homo erectus inheritance is still working, still trying to keep you alive and still following the patterns that evolved over millions of years. Still doing what it evolved to do. The question is whether you'll listen to it, whether you'll pay attention to what it's trying to tell you about the mismatch between modern life and human nature, whether you'll find ways to honour your evolutionary inheritance even while living in a world so different from the one that shaped you. Homo erectus can't give you answers, they're gone, but their 2 million year run suggests that some truths about survival are timeless. That simplicity often beats complexity over the long term. That adaptation without dominance might last longer than innovation without restraint. That being enough might be more important than being more. These are hard lessons for modern humans. We've built our entire civilization on the opposite values. But maybe, just maybe, as we face the challenges ahead, we'll need to remember what Homo erectus knew. That endurance is its own form of wisdom, that lasting matters more than shining, that the long walk through time requires patience, humility, and the willingness to be good enough without needing to be the best. They walked for 2 million years. We've walked for 300,000. The path ahead is long, and whether we make it depends on lessons we're only beginning to learn. Rest now. The ancient ones walked their path. We're still walking ours. And the morning will come soon enough, bringing another day in our species-long experiment with survival. There's something else we need to explore. Something that might surprise you about what Homo erectus's long existence teaches us. Something about time itself, and how understanding deep time changes everything about how you see your own life. Because here's what happens when you really grasp 2 million years. When you stop treating it as just a number and start feeling it as duration, as actual lived experience accumulated across generations beyond counting. Everything shifts. Your perspective changes. The things that feel important in daily life start to seem smaller, and the things that actually matter over the long term become clearer. Let's try an exercise. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Picture your grandmother. If you didn't know her, picture her anyway. Imagine what she might have been like. Now picture her grandmother, and her grandmother, and hers. Keep going back, generation after generation, each woman giving birth to the next, an unbroken chain stretching backward through time. After about 25 generations, you're back roughly 600 years. Medieval times. Your ancestors were peasants or merchants or craftspeople, living lives we can barely imagine, speaking languages you wouldn't understand, holding beliefs you'd find strange or alarming. After 100 generations, you're back 2,500 years. Your ancestors might have been living in ancient Greece or China or Mesoamerica, or more likely in small agricultural communities whose names were never written down, whose stories were never told beyond their immediate descendants. After 500 generations, you're back 12,500 years. Your ancestors are among the first people experimenting with agriculture, settling in permanent villages, beginning the long process of building the civilizations that would eventually produce you. But most of your ancestors at this time are still hunter-gatherers, still living mobile lives, still following patterns older than farming. After 1,000 generations, you're back 25,000 years. Your ancestors are modern humans, anatomically identical to you, but living in the Ice Age, hunting mammoth and bison, creating cave art, telling stories around fires that we'll never hear. After 10,000 generations, you're back 250,000 years. Your ancestors are early Homo sapiens, just barely recognizable as our species, with slightly different skull shapes, slightly different proportions, but carrying the genetic material that would eventually become you. After 20,000 generations, you're back 500,000 years. Your ancestors aren't Homo sapiens at all, they're Homo heidelbergensis, the species that probably gave rise to both Neanderthals and modern humans, with brains nearly as large as yours, but living lives that would seem utterly alien to you. After 40,000 generations, you're back 1 million years. Your ancestors are Homo erectus, still walking upright, still making hand axes, still sitting around fires, still enduring, and you need to go back twice that far to reach the beginning of Homo erectus' story. 80,000 generations, 80,000 unbroken links in a chain of mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, each one surviving long enough to reproduce, each one passing forward the genetic material that would eventually, after 2 million years and countless intermediate steps, become you. That's what 2 million years means, not in abstract numbers but in lived experience. 80,000 generations of people waking up, finding food, raising children, dealing with whatever challenges their particular time and place threw at them, and surviving long enough to create the next generation. And here's what becomes clear when you really sit with this, when you feel it rather than just thinking about it. Your personal problems, the things that occupy your attention and create stress and feel overwhelming in the moment, they're vanishingly small against this backdrop. Not unimportant to you, not meaningless in your immediate life, but small, temporary, drops in an ocean of time. The argument you had yesterday, the work deadline you're worried about, the social embarrassment you can't stop replaying, the financial pressure, the relationship drama, the career uncertainty. All of it, every single thing that feels pressing and urgent and crucial right now, it will be completely forgotten within a few generations at most. Your great-great-grandchildren won't know it happened, won't remember your name, won't have any idea what you worried about or achieved or failed at. This isn't meant to be depressing, it's meant to be freeing. Because if your problems don't matter in the grand sweep of time, then you don't need to carry them with such weight. You can do your best, make your choices, live your life, and let the outcomes be what they are, knowing that none of it determines anything in the long term. Homo erectus individuals felt stress too. They worried about finding water during droughts. They feared predators in the darkness. They grieved when children died. They felt pain and loss and difficulty just as you do. But they didn't carry the weight of distant future consequences. They didn't worry about their legacy or their impact on history or whether they'd be remembered. They just lived, day by day, generation by generation, doing what needed doing without the burden of cosmic significance. And maybe that's wisdom. Maybe one of the things we have lost in becoming modern humans is the ability to be present without constantly projecting forward, without needing our lives to mean something beyond the immediate experience of living them. Because here's a strange truth. Homo erectus didn't know they would last 2 million years. They couldn't have conceived of that time span. They just kept going one day at a time, and the accumulation of all those days, all those generations, all those individuals just doing what they needed to survive, that added up to something remarkable. You don't need to plan for 2 million years. You don't need to ensure your personal significance across geological time. You just need to do what you can with the time you have. And if enough people do that, if enough generations keep going, keep adapting, keep enduring, then maybe your species will still be here 2 million years from now. Or maybe it won't. Either way, your responsibility is just to live your life well, to do what seems right in the circumstances you face, and to let the deep future take care of itself. This is liberating when you really absorb it. The pressure to be special, to achieve great things, to leave a mark on history, all of that becomes optional. Nice if it happens, not required for a life to be worthwhile. Homo erectus individuals didn't need to be special, they just needed to be good enough. And collectively, across 2 million years, good enough added up to one of the most successful species in human evolutionary history. So maybe you don't need to be special either. Maybe being good enough is actually enough. Maybe the pressure you feel to optimize every aspect of your life, to achieve more, to be better, to leave a legacy, maybe that's just anxiety born from losing touch with deep time, from forgetting that individual lives are tiny moments in species-level stories that unfold across millions of years. Let that settle for a moment. The permission to be ordinary, the freedom from needing to be remarkable, the understanding that your life matters to you and to the people immediately around you, and that's sufficient. You don't need to matter to history. You don't need to be remembered for centuries. You just need to live well in the time you have. Homo erectus teaches this through their sheer duration, because nothing any individual Homo erectus did mattered in the long term. No single hand axe changed their species' trajectory. No single child raised or meal shared or fire maintained altered the arc of their 2 million year existence. But collectively all of it mattered. All the ordinary days, all the mundane survival activities, all the uncelebrated lives, they added up to endurance on a scale we can barely comprehend. Your life is like that too, ordinary and yet part of something larger. Insignificant on cosmic scales and yet essential to the only time and place where you exist. You don't need to reconcile this paradox, you just need to accept it and live accordingly. But there's another lesson in Homo erectus' story, something about adaptation and change. Because while they were conservative in their technology and their basic lifestyle, they weren't static. They did change, just slowly, gradually, across time frames that make modern notions of progress look absurd. Their brains grew. Over 2 million years, brain volume increased from about 900 to 1,100 cubic centimeters. That's not trivial growth. But it happened so slowly that no individual or group would have noticed. No generation looked at their children and thought, ah yes, their heads are noticeably larger than ours. The change was too subtle, too gradual, too spread out across time for direct observation. Their tools improved. Hand axes from later periods are more symmetrical, more refined, better crafted than those from earlier periods. Again, not revolutionary change, not sudden innovation, just slow refinement, each generation slightly better than the last at the craft of tool-making, tiny improvements accumulating across millennia. Their range expanded, from African origins to European and Asian colonization. But this expansion took hundreds of thousands of years, incremental movement following resources, adapting to new environments without abandoning core strategies, patient geographic growth rather than explosive colonization. This is evolution in action. This is what change looks like when it's sustainable across deep time. Not dramatic disruption, not revolutionary transformation, just steady improvement, gradual adaptation, patient refinement of what already works. And maybe modern humans could learn from this. We're obsessed with rapid change, disruptive innovation, revolutionary transformation. We celebrate the new and dismiss the old. We assume that faster change is better change, that dramatic shifts are superior to incremental improvements. But Homo erectus suggests otherwise. Their slow change, their conservative innovation, their reluctance to abandon proven strategies for untested novelties. This approach carried them through 2 million years. Our rapid change, our constant disruption, our willingness to overturn everything in pursuit of the next breakthrough, We don't yet know if this approach can even carry us through 500,000 years, let alone 2 million. Maybe there's a middle path. Maybe we can maintain some of our innovative capacity while recovering some of Homo erectus's patient conservatism. Maybe we can change when change is necessary, but also have the wisdom to recognize when the old ways work fine and don't need improvement. This isn't anti-progress. This is just recognition that progress has different meanings over different timescales. Over 10 years or 100 years, rapid innovation might look like progress. But over 100,000 years or 1 million years, sustainable stability might prove more valuable than disruptive change. Homo erectus wasn't trying to make a point about change versus stability, they were just living. But the outcome of their way of life, the 2 million year endurance, that speaks to the effectiveness of their approach. And we, with our mere 300,000 years, maybe we should pay attention. Let's shift to something more immediate, more personal. Something about your own experience of time and how it relates to this deep history we've been exploring. You experience time in moments, seconds, minutes, hours, days, the immediate now bleeding into the immediate next. Your brain constructs a sense of continuous experience from these moments, creating the illusion of a smooth flow of time. But really you're living in a series of present moments, each one replacing the last. This is how Homo erectus experienced time too. The eternal now, immediate sensory experience, the sun rising, hunger building, food found, danger avoided, safety regained, exhaustion settling, sleep coming. Moment after moment, each one present and real, and then gone, replaced by the next. But you also experience time as memory, the past that you carry with you, the accumulated experiences that shape how you interpret the present. Your childhood, your relationships, your achievements and failures, all of it creating a personal narrative that extends backward from this moment. Homo erectus had this too, though probably simpler, more immediate. They remembered where food sources were, which territories were safe, which animals were dangerous, which people could be trusted. Practical memory, functional memory, the kind that helps you survive rather than construct elaborate stories about identity and meaning. And you experience time as anticipation, the future you're planning for, worrying about, hoping for. Tomorrow, next week, next year, retirement, old age, the vague sense of the rest of your life stretching ahead. Homo erectus had some of this. They could plan ahead enough to gather wood for tonight's fire, to track animals for hours knowing the pursuit would eventually pay off, to travel toward distant water sources they would have remembered from previous journeys, but probably not the elaborate future planning that modern humans engage in, the decades-long career trajectories and retirement savings and legacy building. So you experience time in 3 modes: present, past, future, and modern life tends to pull you out of the present and into the other 2. You're either remembering and regretting or planning and worrying. Actually being here, in this moment, that's harder than it should be. But this moment, right now, as you're lying there in the dark, this is the only time that's real. The past is gone. The future hasn't happened. All you ever have is now, this breath, this sensation, this moment of consciousness. And this is the time Homo erectus lived in. Not because they were philosophically enlightened, but because they lacked the cognitive architecture for extensive mental time travel. They were more anchored in the present by default. And maybe that was a gift disguised as the limitation, because being present, really present, reduces suffering. The anxiety about the future, the regret about the past, most of the psychological pain modern humans experience comes from not being in the now. If you could stay in this moment, accepting it as it is without comparison to other moments or projection onto future moments, the fundamental experience would be okay. Not always pleasant, not always comfortable, but manageable, bearable, okay. Homo erectus lived this way because they had to. You can choose it, at least sometimes, especially at night when the day's demands have faded, and you're just here, breathing, existing. being alive in this particular moment that will never come again. Let yourself be here. Let the story of Homo erectus fade into background. Let the comparison between their 2 million years and our 300,000 become just another thought that rises and passes. Let the worries about modern life and species survival and deep time all settle into the general stream of consciousness that flows through you, but isn't you. You're here, now. In this body that carries 2 million years of Homo erectus influence plus 300,000 years of Homo sapiens modification. In this moment, that's part of the long story of human existence, but also just its own discrete instant of experience that matters to no one but you. And that's enough. That's always been enough for Homo erectus individuals and for you just being here, just experiencing this moment, just continuing the long chain of existence that stretches back through more generations than you can count and forward to destinations you'll never know. You don't have to solve anything tonight. Don't have to figure out how to make your species last 2 million years. Don't have to reconcile the mismatch between your evolutionary inheritance and modern life. Don't have to become a different person or make different choices or change the world. You just have to be here, breathing, resting, allowing your body to do what it's been doing for millions of years, recovering, repairing, preparing for tomorrow, trusting that the same processes that carried Homo erectus through 2 million years are still operating in you, still trying to keep you alive, still doing their job even when you're not paying attention. There's comfort in that, in knowing that you're not separate from the deep story of human existence. You're part of it, continuous with it. One more moment in a story that's been unfolding for longer than language can express and will continue after you're gone for time frames you can't conceive. You didn't ask to be born into this particular moment of human history. You didn't choose to inherit the challenges and opportunities of the early 21st century. The aftermath of Homo erectus's long run and deep into Homo sapiens is still unfolding experiment with rapid change and complex civilization. But here you are, part of this ongoing story, carrying DNA that stretches back through Homo erectus to earlier hominins, to primates, to mammals, to the first multicellular life billions of years ago. An unbroken chain of successful reproduction reaching back to the origin of life itself. That's what you are. Not just a person with problems and goals and relationships and worries. You're the latest expression of a process so ancient and persistent that it survived everything Earth could throw at it. From asteroid impacts to ice ages to volcanic apocalypses to mass extinctions. You're the current moment in a story that's been running for billions of years and shows no sign of stopping. And Homo erectus is part of your story. Not just ancestors in the family tree, part of what you are. The endurance specialists, the ones who figured out how to keep going through changes that would end other species. Their strategies, their adaptations, their patient conservatism, it's all still in you, still influencing how you think and feel and respond to the world. When you feel the urge to walk, to move, to cover ground, that's Homo erectus. When you're drawn to fire, to the comfort and safety of flame, that's Homo erectus. When you feel most human in small groups, around shared meals and face-to-face connection, that's Homo erectus. When you find satisfaction in making things with your hands, in solving concrete problems, in understanding how the natural world works, that's Homo erectus. They're all not gone, not really. They're in you, diluted by 300,000 years of Homo sapiens evolution, modified by culture and technology, and all the changes that make you modern. But still there, still present, still part of what makes you human. And maybe that's the final lesson of their 2 million year run. That endurance isn't just about the species persisting, it's about something essential being transmitted forward, carried through time and maintained across as changes that would seem to erase it, but somehow don't. Homo erectus, the species, is extinct. But Homo erectus, the adaptation, Homo erectus, the strategy, Homo erectus, the approach to being human, that endures. In you, in every person alive, The gift of the endurance specialists, still operating, still influencing, still trying to keep us alive in ways we don't always recognize or appreciate. So as you drift towards sleep, as your consciousness begins to fade and your thoughts slow and your body settles into rest, maybe you can feel it. The connection to those 80,000 generations before you. The long chain of mothers and fathers and children stretching back through time. The patient accumulation of moments that added up to 2 million years. You're part of that. One more link in the chain, one more moment in the story, one more breath in the long respiration of human existence that's been going on for longer than you can grasp, and will continue after you're gone for durations you can't imagine. And that's okay. You don't need to grasp it all, don't need to understand your place in deep time, or your significance in species-level stories. You just need to be here, now, living this moment as well as you can, trusting that the next moment will come and you'll live that one too. One breath at a time, one day at a time, continuing the pattern that's been running for 2 million years. Homo erectus walked for 2 million years. We've walked for 300,000. The walk continues. And you right now are walking it. Not physically, not in this moment of rest, but in the deeper sense of continuing, enduring, being part of the ongoing story of what it means to be human. The ancient ones are gone. Their fires are cold. Their last footsteps were taken hundreds of thousands of years ago. But they're still here too, in the DNA you carry, in the body you inhabit, in the patterns of thought and feeling and response that make you human. They endured. You endure. The long story continues. And tonight, that's enough to know. Sleep now. Let the 2 million years fade into background. Let the comparisons and lessons and implications all dissolve into the general drift of consciousness towards sleep. Let your Homo erectus body do what it's been doing for millions of years. Rest, recover, prepare for tomorrow. The walk through time is long, but you don't have to walk it all tonight. Tonight you can rest. The ancient ones earned you this rest, bought it with 2 million years of endurance, paid for it with their patient survival through everything the planet threw at them. You're safe, you're here, you're part of something larger than yourself and older than you can imagine and still ongoing, still unfolding, still continuing into futures you'll never see. And that's beautiful. That's enough. That's everything you need to know as you drift into sleep. The long endurance continues. Homo erectus started it. We carry it forward. And the night is deep enough for all of it. Good night. May you dream of long walks through deep time, of fires burning across millennia, of the patient accumulation of moments into something vast and beautiful and beyond comprehension. The ancient ones would be proud. You're here. You're continuing. You're carrying forward the long story they started so many generations ago. Rest well. Fellow walker through time. The morning comes soon enough, and with it, another day in our species' ongoing experiment with existence. But tonight, just rest. The 2 million years can wait until morning. You've earned this sleep, bought and paid for by ancestors who endured so you could be here. Sleep now. Oh. The long walk continues, and you're part of it. Good night.